Remember, this is where we left off, right? This is where we left off. So what we're talking about, basically, we're talking about the fact that there is like a firewall, more or less like something that you have to reach before you get to the EC2. And we said that most times when you see timeouts, there are usually things that is so timeout most times is an indication that the firewall is blocking you, right? And sometimes you've connected and the application itself is not responding. That's different. But sometimes when it's timeout means it didn't even get to the EC2. Usually when you get to the EC2 is already trying to do something, right? So you find out that in most cases, when you see timeout, it just means that you never got to the EC2. Like I mentioned, the firewall itself is before the EC2, so it's just before it, right? So until you can pass that firewall before you can get to the EC2, and in this case, the firewall is really a security group. I think for a lot of people, they probably are used to this. So if you worked with the traditional, if you've worked in the traditional setup before, physical setup, there's usually like a firewall device, right? But we said if you move to the cloud, all these things will change. They become virtualized devices, right? So I don't need to stress a lot on this. I told you. So default, if you just create a security group, no traffic is allowed inside, but everyone is allowed to go out. You need to know all these things because you see them in your exam. Sometimes in the exam they will ask you probably what is wrong, and you basically need to know the difference, especially when we say something is stateful, the fact that it knows when you're allowed in and it's going to allow you out, right? And we said you don't specify deny in a security group, you only specify allow, right? You can attach it to multiple instances, and one instance can have multiple security group attached to it, right? And we said security group can reference other security groups. Okay, so just this is the last slide I shared the last time we were here. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I'm just showing you the user data script that we used that the last time we were here. I think this is what Pedro was asking for, but basically we said it's a one-time script, right? A one-time script basically for just the first time the application, this EC2 boots, right? So it's a script that can do a lot of things for you, whether it's to download files, whether it's to pull resource from S3. It can do anything because why? You have access to the internet. So you can even go to a GitHub repo, clone something, basically whatever you want to do. And somebody was asking me what kind of script has to be there. You're choosing, basically. It's basically a bootstrap script. But we'll see, in the future how well you can optimize those scripts because you don't want a situation whereby your EC2, every time it's booting, it has to do all that, right? There are ways where you can build it once, make an AMI out of it, and then subsequently you don't need to redo that step. Okay, but we'll see that as time goes on. So I also talked about IP address management, right? If you remember when we created this EC2 instance, it gave us two flavors of IP address. One was the public IP address, one was the private IP address. And you saw some of the nuances we experienced when we were trying to use the private IP address. And the reason is because a private IP address is inside the AWS network, which means from the internet or from anywhere around the world, there is no way you can have access to that private IP, right? Because it's an internal IP. And we also said that we saw that there was one that was public, right? And that we could put in the browser and immediately we got access to the application, right? So for the most part, there is usually that private internal, right? So if you are inside the AWS account, you can always reach those private ones. But if you're outside, there is no way, right? And that's where some of the issues were when we're trying to more or less like do SSH into the machine and we're doing it from the internet, there's no way we would have been able to get to the private one. As you advance, there are ways, right? That's where the concept of VPN comes in, where you can more or less like there's a VPN between you, or there's like a direct connection there's direct connection between you and your AWS instance, and becomes very easy for you to create that connection. But just know out of the box, it's only the public IP that is out there, right? So what are the characteristics? I think I mentioned it. The private IPs. So when you start and stop the machine, those private IP addresses will not change. It's going to remain the same. So if you start the machine, you stop it, the private IP will not change, right? It's also free. You don't pay for private IP addresses, okay? But for the public IP addresses, once you stop the machine and you restart it, it's public, right? It's going to change, right? So it's going to change. And that one is charged. So it's charged. There's like a free tier that you have access to. So more or less like if you have one public IP in your account for the whole month, you're not charged, okay? So it comes with the free tier. But public IPs ordinarily are charged, okay? So the more public IP addresses that you have, the more you'll be paying. Elastic IP addresses are now more or less like they're public IPs, but they are more or less like you can. The difference there is that you can have them. So it's elastic in the sense that it can live outside the machine, right? Usually, if you notice that EC2 instance is tied to the machine, and that's why when you start and stop the machine, you lose the public IP, right? So, and that's why AWS came up with the concept of having an elastic IP. An elastic IP is something you can request on its own, and then you can attach and detach it from an EC2 instance, right? So in as much as it's attached to a particular instance, it's free. But if you just request it and you're not using it, you are going to be paying, right? And then we also talked about, we won't be talking much about IPv6, but you should know that there is like around the world, public IP addresses are becoming scarce, right? So everyone is being encouraged to switch to IPv6. But we know that most ISPs, not a lot of the ISPs, not all the ISPs supports IPv4. So there's a lot of challenges if you try to use IPv6. But again, people are already incorporating it gradually into their workload, right? It's usually free and it's also retained. So it's just like the private IP, and it's free in this case. So everyone is encouraged to move to IPv6. Okay, so like I said, you pay basically for your public IPs, and IPv6 they are basically free. So this is where I'm just giving more textual content around what I said. But again, I also wanted to point out here that if you create public IP as part of your application load balancer, your RDS, or some other places where you create those IPs, you are going to be charged. So it's not covered under the free tier. The only place it is covered under the free tier is when you use it with like a T2 micro, like an EC2 instance, right? That is covered based on the free tier, okay? And then, you can always go into your account and troubleshoot if there was like a charge that came through your IP address. So I think I can actually show you what this one looks like right now. So that I don't want to come back to this slide again. So what I'm trying to say is that, and I go, where am I? Let me see. So I'm not in my root account, and let me just zoom in a bit. So if I go to my bills, one thing you can see about your bill. So this is you. If you are in your account and maybe you're charged because you are using like a public IP and you don't know where to find it, you can come into your account. Usually, like for me, 0, 0, everything is 0. But usually there is like a cost explorer where you see breakdown of services. But if you actually go to your bill, which tells you exactly what you have been billed for, and you see the services here, it should show up here. So and just know that at the end, right now I'm 0, 0, right? But if I was being charged for something, remember it's pay as you go, right? So you will not be charged if you are not using the service. So at the end of your bill, you should see if you are using a public IP here, and that is an indication that you pretty much need to either stop it or you know what to do with IP, a public IP if you are using one. There is also, I know this is there's a lot that happens on if you were using EPAM, right, which is like an IP address manager from AWS. This is a service that if you were going through the advanced networking route, you see this service. There's a lot that happens in here, so I'm not going to discuss it. But one thing it has is this public IP insights, and it basically tells you your public IPs that you are using. So what it means is that you can use it to monitor your IP address. So EPAM is really the new way of standardizing the IPs within your organization or within your account. So you can more or less like create like a structure of your IP address, put a root IP address, break them further, But all that is like you do a lot of that in advanced networking. But what it means is that you can actually create an IPAM, right? And say, because it's eligible under free tier, right? You can create one. I can just basically leave the default, and I can choose regions that I want, right? So in this case, maybe US West 2, and then I can just create it. So when this is created, what it means is that you can basically go back and see your public IP address inside. So right now, it says none found, right? But if there was really public IPs, remember I said you pay for public IPs, right? Unless it is attached, unless you are within that free tier, right? The one that is attached to like that EC2 instance. Okay, so but if you wanted to troubleshoot the IP addresses, the public IP addresses in your account, this is one place to see it. If you ever get a bill from your public IP address usage, you can also check your bill and just check if there is somewhere you have been charged for using public IP. Okay, so that's pretty much it around public IPs. Okay, so let's continue. Let's see. Let's continue. So let's talk about the EC2 instance state. If you notice when we were working with the EC2 instance the last time, you noticed that when we started the machine, it was in pending state, right? So it was pending, and then we waited for it, and it got into a running state, right? So running state is basically where the state you get to when the machine is running. Right? It's really running state, right? And there's really like when you stop it, it goes into like a stopping state. And then when it is stopped completely, it goes into a stop state, right? And then when you terminate it for a while, for some time you see it under that console. You can search. You find the ones that has a new status called terminated. Okay. And just so you know, these are the steps. These are the states your EC2 instance can be, right? So most times, if your EC2 instance is running, you'll be billed, right? But if it's stopped, if there is a volume that is attached to it, you basically are going to get billed from those volumes. Remember, volumes, especially if it's not covered via the free tier, you're using space, right? It could be 50 GB that is attached to the EC2 instance. So when you stop the EC2 instance, remember we said compute, you're billed based on if the compute is running. So in this case, you stop the compute, but it's using a volume, right, that is using space, and you have to pay for that. Okay. And we also said that instance store basically is like a hardware, like it's a hardware store that is attached. So it's actually attached to the EC2 instance, right? But the only problem is that if you stop it or you restart the machine, and the data is gone. Okay, so it's not persistent, and that's why we say EBS, EFS are the persistent options that you have out there. Okay, so like I said, at this step, you're not really doing anything, very deep with all these things, but the ones that we need to practicalize them, we'll practicalize them. But you still need to get the concept. Okay, so instance store, never miss it. There are three major kind of storage around compute, EC2 in this case. It's instance, it's EBS, and it's EFX, and they all have their use. Okay, their use case. So just know that when they say instance store, it's something that is not persistent. When you stop the machine, the volume is going to be wiped out, or when you restart the machine. Okay. Yeah, it's ephemeral. So I'm just mentioning it here again. One thing you should notice is that it's physically attached. Okay. But the good thing about it is that if you think about EBS, I think someone has asked me before on this call, but I told you that EBS is a network device. So it means even your machine is reaching it via the network. But an instance store is actually plugged. It's actually connected to the EC2 instance. So when it comes to IOPS, it gives you like IOPS that even EBS can't give, right? Because there's a lot of IOPS that you get from those instance store. Okay. But again, the problem is really data is lost when you restart the machine. Okay. So usually, yeah, it's great for temporary files, right? Something you need temporarily to do your stuff, but you don't really, if the machine should stop, restart, you don't really care. So it's really for data that you don't care. You're just using it for the time being. Okay. So cache, buffers, temporary scratch files. Okay. So we're back again. Now we're talking about IAM role and instance profile, right? If you remember, I've always told you that usually one service needs to talk to another service. That's when you have the concept of a role, right, in the AWS account. And we tried that. We've tried that. We've actually demoed it before in the past, right? And we used what do you call it? We used what did we use? We used a Lambda to demo that pattern, right? But it's not just Lambda. Lambda is an AWS service, but we've just talked about EC2, right? So EC2 is also a service, right? So think about it. A compute like EC2 won't just be running. It might need to do things. It might need to run a computation, save things in an S3 bucket. It might need to do like send message to an SNS topic. It might need to read from a queue, an SQS queue in this case. So what it means is that a compute is not just there. It's only meaningful when it has to do things, right, with the AWS services you have, right? So maybe the compute is talking to like an SNS topic or a queue or a bucket, But again, that brings the original problem, right? One service, in this case, EC2, needs to talk to another service. And that's where like a role comes in. We've seen it work in Lambda. It's also the same here, right? So, and the whole idea is really to avoid us storing long-term access keys on the servers, right? So instead of you storing, because if role is not involved, you have to go into the machine, you have to put in your access keys, right? So to be able to do whatever you have to do, okay? And the good thing about it is that those credentials are always refreshed, right? So because the thing is that as at the time the EC2 wants to make the request, that's when credential is given to it and then it uses it. I think we've said that several times, but it's really at the point of trying to make the request, it gets credential, it uses it. So the credentials are always refreshed, right? So just so you know. So permissions, the changes, they take effect instantly, which is good. We don't have like, static credentials lying inside the machine. And this one is what I'm going to show you now. So I've showed you two things. I'm going to show you something now, okay? So let's go to our machine. So like I said, the fastest way to get to EC2 instance for the most part is always just search for the service, okay? You don't have to stress yourself, okay? So let's go to instances. So there's one here that is running. It's a T2 micro. So let's see. Let me see if I fix the security group. Inbound rules, there is an inbound group. So we have like, if you remember, this was the same EC2 instance that we were dealing with the last time. So I'm not going to create another one because it probably will take time, right? So what do we want to do? So if I go into the EC2 instance now, okay, so let me go through Cloud Shell. Let's see. Cloud Shell. Just so you know, see. So if I do this, by going to Cloud Shell, I'm just going to close. Remember, no, I don't really want in this. I want to create one in my region. So let me create one in US West too. So if you remember what I was saying at the beginning, I said that when you're inside of Cloud Shell, I think we're having this issue the last time. So I think we already have this terminal. So it's pretty much, we should be able to connect. It looks like the old terminal is still here, right? I didn't destroy it, so it's still good. Pretty much you need to exit that and try it again. Use the right credential now. Yeah, you see what I was mentioning about being in different regions, right? So it looks like then I was in a different region. I'd already picked a new EC2 machine. This one won't work, and the reason is just because the security group is not allowing anything. So it's just going to run for forever. There's no security group allowed, right? So I need to set this security group correctly. So in this case, I need to allow. I basically need to edit. Just add a rule temporarily for SSH from, let's say, this, temporarily for this. And then what I can do basically is to go back to the console here and try it again. So okay, so I'm in now. Okay, so I'm in. So if I do SNS list topics, so you see, it's telling me that I need to do AWS configure, right? And if you remember correctly, we've done AWS configure before, right? Whether it's on your local machine or in the cloud, but I told you that AWS configure itself is like a step, right? It's like a step that you can use to more or less like configure the console, right? But it's not ideal, because if I do AWS configure, anyone that has access to this machine is going to have access to those keys, because why? I told you it's saved in a particular location, right? So anyone who has access to that location can just find it. So the best thing to do is where instance role comes in, right? So if I go back to the instance, right, and I go back to the details of the machine. So in this case, the machine is here. You can see IAM role right now, there is none, right? So what it means is that we need to go here. I think it's instance setting. Let's see, where are you now? Security, we can modify the instance role. Okay, so right now there is no instance role. Okay, but again, we can create a new one. Okay, so you can actually go in there, create a new one. In this case, this way, I think if you remember, we've done this before, right? We ask it which service, in this case, which service is going to use it. So I'll say EC2 is going to use it, and I'll say next. And I'm like, remember before we said there is a concept of like a managed policy, right? But instead of me choosing a managed policy, I pretty much want to create my own. So I don't want to use an AWS managed policy, or I can even do like a customer managed one. It's just that there is none. I've not really created anyone. So I'm just going to do next. And then I'll just say EC2 role, right? So I'm just going to do EC2 role. This is what I'm going to call it. And then here is where I'll add the permission. So in this case, okay, maybe I can go and create my own permission. So let me create a simple one, just a simple permission. But I think this step is known to you already, right? So I can go to policies, I can create a new one. I can basically call it I can just say it's a, who is going to use it? Oh no, sorry, which service do I want to use? In this case, I'm just going to get this one out. I want to use SNS in this case. And the action I want to do, I want to be able to list topic on all the resources. So maybe I don't need more permissions. I think this is good enough. So I can say lambda, no, sorry, EC2 role SNS, right? So, or EC2, I'll call it EC2 SNS role in this case. Then here I can say EC2 role to allow SNS, So in this case, I can list topic. I'm just going to create the policy. So that's the policy. The policy has been created. So here, when I want to create my role, I need to add a policy. You see why your knowledge of policy is working right now. So here, I pretty much need to look for that IAM role, right? So let me just type SNS. It's this one that we created. So I'm going to use this, and then I'm going to do next as the permission. So it's an EC2 role I'm creating, and who assume it? EC2 is going to use it. And I'm just going to go next because it uses a permission, right? The permission is here. So I'm going to create the role. So the role has been created. So if I go back to the instance where I was before, I was trying to modify the instance. I'm just going to refresh this. And what's the name of the role again? EC2 role. So I'm just going to call it EC2 role. So it's here, this one that I just created. And then I'll just update the server, right? So I'm updating the machine. So now it now has a role. It now has a role. So if I go back to the machine, so I go back to where I was before, which is Cloud Shell. So let's see if what I was trying to do before can work now. Underscore default region US West 2. No, I don't want to configure anything. Let's see. Sometimes it takes time. It takes time to kick in. So Let me create a new one. Let me just see. Okay, let me do exit, and then let me go in again. Uh, oh, what did I do before? Sorry, I didn't export it. I just set the region, but I didn't export it. So export, and then let me do list topics again. Yeah, you see it's working now. So before I was setting, if you remember, there was this key. We talked about AWS default region at one point, right? We talked about AWS default region being the like a way for you to specify which region you're running in. Remember, I was trying to execute something, but the guy wasn't sure which region am I, right? So, but AWS configure would have done that. I could have as well given it like an access key, like a secret, give it a region, and automatically it's going to work. But in this case, I can't, right? Um, I wouldn't do that. So rather, I'll specify my region. In this case, I said the default region, and then I'm using SNS list topics because there's a rule that the Lambda, the function is already using that has that, okay, and it's working. So one thing you need to know is that how you know is that if I do AWS and I do SNS, and I said, remember there was this one too that we used at some point, create topic, and I said topic name, right? Or I think we could just give it a name, and I say test topic. Let's see what it will say if I do this. So you can see, it tells me that this user does not have the permission. So let me move my screen a bit. Um, let me move it a bit. So you can see it says that EC2 role is not authorized to do create topic, right? But it can list topic, you know. So that's the whole idea. The fact that you can list topic, but you can't create topic because we gave it a role, and in the role there was a specific policy of what it can do. Okay. So that's just the concept of IAM role. We've seen before. It's just that we did it via Lambda. Now we are doing it via EC2 instance. But it's the same concept of the IAM permissions, you know, creating a role, for example, or just adding a permission to it. All that is basic IAM stuff. And then here we are basically attaching a role. A role is just which identity is still EC2 going to use to interact with other AWS services, right? And that's what we've shown. So it works. So if we go back and we say we want to list topic is going to work. But create topic is not going to work because the guy does not have permission to do that. Okay. What else am I going to show you? So I just showed you instance role. So it helps you to avoid like sharing your long-time access keys, you know, and it allows you to basically auto rotate your permissions, right? So you don't, there's really no static keys that is in there. Okay. So which brings me to a very good time to talk about EC2 Instance Connect. So we've talked about EC2, right? And we've talked about IAM role, using it on top of EC2. Now there is a concept of Instance Connect. So if you remember, we've been doing SSH all this while, either through my computer or basically through Cloud Shell, right? So I've done it via Windows, and I've also done it via the Cloud Shell. But one thing you should take note is that there is actually a service called EC2 Instance Connect that can give you that same SSH access, but via the browser in this case. Okay. So what it does is that it basically it pushes what do you call it, like a one-time public SSH key for you, right, into the account because it knows the EC2 instance, so it knows the key that the EC2 instance, the key pair that the EC2 instance is using. So it can actually push a public key for you to use, you know. So out of the box, but it actually requires you to have port 22 open. Okay. So let's try that one out since we are just inside of EC2 instance. So let me try that. So let's go back. So we have an EC2 instance here, and we've been connecting using Cloud Shell, right? But there's another way we can connect. So we can go back to that same EC2 instance, right? And we can scroll all the way down to this place, click on the instance, and there's a connect button here, okay? So if I click on connect, you see there are different options. So right now we're not talking about all these other options, but there's SS Session Manager, there's SSH client, there's EC2 Serial Console. The one I want you to focus on that I'm talking about is this one, because this one gives you the same, more or less like SSH access, but via the browser, just like how Cloud Shell also is, right? So if I do connect, so you know it's trying to establish a connection for me in my browser, right? And I'm in, right? I didn't have to do all the configuration that I was doing in Cloud Shell. I didn't have to upload my my key pair. I didn't have to set all the permissions, right? So, and again, if I go back and do what I was doing before, and I do SNS, and I say list topics, right? What do you think is going to happen? Okay. Remember, I did set the default region, but now I'm in a new shell. So AWS default, let's say region, so that it knows the region that I'm working from. So US, I'm just going to do US, US West 2, right? And then let's try to list the topics again. Export AWS. Yes, I think there's a typo there. So it's default. So I'm just going to do this, default region, and then try to list topic again. Yeah, it's the same. So it's the same access, right? EC2 already has the role. I'm just logged in via, you know, Instance Connect, and I can do the same thing, right? So if I also do AWS SNS and I said create topic, so it's the same. Like it's still going to work. So and I do name is test topic. Let's see if that one is going to work. So you can see it's clearly stated there that it's not going to work because I don't have the right permission, right? So yeah, I can zoom that in. So the permission is not, it's not there. So what is Instance Connect? It's just your same SSH that you were doing, but this one drops you in. You don't have to, it's just like more or less like you don't have to configure the access, you don't have to upload like a key pair. You don't have to, there's only one caveat. So you see right now it's working. And what if I exit? And so I'm back to the EC2 instance. So I've exited it. So there is only one caveat that you need to know. If I go back to the security group that is here, and I edit it, it needs port 22 to be open. So if I go here, the inbound rule, and I delete this rule, so edit inbound rule, and I delete this one, okay, and I save the rule. If I go back to Instance Connect and try to use it, let's see if it's going to work. So the same, just what I was doing before. But in this case, I'm like connecting using a public IP, right? So if I try to do connect, it's not going to work, right? Because it requires port 22 to be open. Okay, so that's just it. So it's going to be here. It's not going to work. You fail to connect to the EC2 instance. So that's all you need to know about Instance Connect. Like I always say, there are so many ways you can do the same thing, right? So if you see, I wasn't even using Instance Connect at the beginning. I was using Cloud Shell. I was doing the same, right? But Instance Connect takes it one step further, because if you think about it, when we're in the shell, we have to upload the key pair, we have to set like a permission, we have to like do like a ch mode to change the permission of the file. We have to like write our own SSH command and all that. But just using Instance Connect, the SSH Connect, you can just go directly into the machine, right? In as much as you have the right setup in place. Okay, so I think that wraps it up for that particular topic. So let's continue. So we were here before, we just talked about, so it's browser SSH. The same SSH we were doing before. It's not different from this SSH. It's just that this one is via the browser and you don't have to stress. Just go in there, click on connect. It drops you inside the machine directly, right? Troubleshooting, I've said, a lot of times when you see timeouts, so like you see the last time we were trying to use the EC2 Connect, the Instance Connect to go in, and you see because we turned off port 22, it started failing. So it will time out consistently, right? Because it can't connect. So that's one thing to check out for security groups, or if there was like a network access policy, but we're not there yet. And just know that if there was something that was blocking your entrance via 22, it's not going to work, okay? And then connection refuse. Basically, it's mostly you've gotten into the machine, but the service that's supposed to respond to you is not responding, right? Okay, so that's basically it. So, and I said for Mac Linux, OpenSSH obviously would work for you. But if you were using less than Windows 10, that's where you use PuTTY, right? But we saw that also Windows 10, we could just use the basic SSH utility that we have in there, right? So that's exactly what we're doing via Windows. We just did SSH. We didn't have to do any special configuration. It's just that for less than Windows 10, you have to do more, right? You have to do more. It's like get the PPK file, convert it to a PEM file, and then use that. Okay. So that's so what have we done? We've showed like I showed you EC2. We more or less like went back. We did a refresher of security groups. We did reconnect to tell you how important they are, right, in the flow. And then I also introduced the fact that every EC2 instance, if it needs to communicate with another service, it needs like a role, right? The role is what gives it the permission. So we saw instance, in this case, there was a role and a profile we needed to attach to the EC2 instance. And once you had that, you could list topic, right, with SNS. But again, because the permission only had list topic, we couldn't create topic, right? And then I also showed you how you could just, use your Instance Connect to basically go in like SSH in the browser, right? And how you needed port 22 to be open, right? Targeting with the right security group to allow that and that entry to happen. So with that said, if you now start using EC2 as part of your journey, there is now so many pricing options that AWS gives you, and you need to know them. Okay. The idea is that everyone has their own unique use cases, right? So you can't tie everyone to the same usage. You can't tie everyone to be like, okay, use your EC2 this way or procure your EC2 this way. And that's why there's like pricing options when it's like purchasing models that you can operate in AWS, right? The whole idea is just to give you that flexibility depending on how you use your workload. Okay. So I've mentioned 4 very important ones here. On demand is here, and the savings plans, the spot instances, and there's also capacity reservation. And I'm going to go into go in details each one of them. Okay. But the whole idea is that think about it. We just launched our EC2 machine, right? But the thing is that everyone will have their own unique requirements. Some people might just need to use it for a short time. Some people might use it for a long time. Like they want to have the machine running for like a year, right? Some people might just want to use it just for a short time, right? And there's really so many options that covers all these use case depending on you, right? Or what you are doing. So let's look at the first one. The first one is really on demand, right? On demand. So on demand is just the way I have that EC2 launched. I'm actually right now on demand mode. So just know it's like the basic, is like the beginner mode, right? Once you launch an EC2 instance and you don't specify any other things. Remember, I've not gone anywhere to choose a particular savings plan or a purchasing option. So I'm running on demand. So in as much as, in my own case, it is covered by free tier. So in as much as it's just T2 micro is going to run. But if there was another machine that was not T2 micro, as it's running, I'm paying, right? So I'm paying for the machine to be running. But just know that if you launch a machine and you didn't do any other like customization in terms of your purchase option, you are running on demand. Okay. And there's a reason why people do that, right? Maybe your workload is unpredictable, right? You don't really have like you've not understand you are yet to understand the workload, so it's really unpredictable. So that's like a good use of on demand, because it's just in as much as you are running it, you pay, and if you're not running it again, you also don't pay, right? So it's when you demand it. So if you can say I need it now, in the next 5 minutes, you can say you don't need it again, right? It's just on demand. That's the word. So take note of it. Like I said, AWS tries their best to name things properly. So when you hear on demand, you are in control basically. So it's the most flexible. It's the most flexible option because it's the control is in your hand. It's just when you demand it, you get it, right? Um, and then, like I said, it's really the default purchasing option, right? So there's really no discount there. You have to basically go and check, okay, how much is this instance, and take it, like just request it on demand. And then you pay at the end of the day, whatever bill comes to you based on the usage of that EC2 instance. And we can already see that for some people it works. For some people it works, right? But there are some use cases that you may have that on demand wouldn't work for you. And we're going to see them as we go. But just know that for unpredictable workloads, or when you know that, okay, you just want to use it quickly to test something, right? You don't want it to be interrupted. You just want something that is working, that is steady. That's where on demand comes in. Okay. So like I said, the one we've been using, the one that I installed, right, the one that I did, the EC2 machine that you've seen all through this time, is on demand because I didn't do any extra. I didn't go anywhere to reserve anything or request, a purchase option. So it's on demand. Okay. What about savings plan? I think I asked the question before now. This was the question I asked. So usually savings plan, right, is something you choose. You say, okay, I want to do this for 1 year, or you say I want to do it for 3 years, right? And the whole idea is that you tell AWS that I want to commit that I'll spend X amount of dollar for the next 1 year, right? And based on that, you are giving a huge discount, which could be up to 72%, right? And once you get that discount, if peradventure you use above that, it is charged on an on-demand rate. So it's more or less like you have seen your workload and you've seen that over time, it looks like ideally I spend $5, right? So instead of just spending that $5 and not getting anything in return, you can go into AWS, the AWS console, and say, I want to save more. Like I know I usually spend $5 on the average. So now I want to save. So you'll be like, I want to save for the next 1 year, and I'm committing that I'm going to spend $5 an hour. And for that reason, you are giving a huge discount in as much as you are making that commitment. And then if you spend beyond that, a workload that is not covered by that amount, then it is charged based on the on-demand rate. So you can imagine that instead of you spending your $5, you are getting 72% of that, right, per hour, and which is huge savings, right? And one of the good thing about savings plan is really this flexibility that comes with it. So you can switch between instance size, the OS, the tenancy, within a chosen family and region. And if you remember, we talked about family, right? M5, like when you say M, that's like a family. Region, I think I've told you at the beginning what a region is, right? So if you were in US West 2, So one thing savings plan does is that if you choose within a year, it allows you, if you say I'm going into a savings plan, especially if it is compute savings plans. I did put two flavors in the slide. So there is one that is really compute savings plan, and that savings plans you can use it with EC2 can benefit from it, Fargate can benefit from it, Lambda can benefit from it, regardless of the instance family, the size, the AZ, the region, the OS or tenancy. You get that benefit. The benefit is what I mentioned above. So meaning that you are getting a discount because you are committed to spending a particular amount for an hour. Okay. And then inside there is also a different flavor, which is like the EC2 Instance Savings Plan. And in this case, one thing that is common about them is that you notice how here you are committing to an instance family in a specific region. That's the only difference between the two. So in the first one, you have that flexibility across those parameters that I mentioned. But in the second one, you are saying I'm committing to like a family in a particular region. And then your flexibility is now around the size, the AZ, the operating system, or the tenancy. Okay. So it's always based on your use case. So, like from my own experience, we've used savings plan a lot, and the reason is because you've seen you've seen how you use your services over time. You've seen that on the average, I usually spend $5. If I know that I spend $5, why not get discount for that $5 and tell AWS that I'm willing to commit to spending this same $5 for the next 1 year, and then you get a huge discount based on that. And one thing you should also take note about is that since some of these things you can always go back and review some of them, right? Even get more savings plan just in case your usage has differed over time. But that's like we'll see more advanced use cases as time goes on. Remember, I told you that many of the things you see at the cloud practitioner level, you see them at the surface, but as you go deeper, you pretty much will be seeing the same subject but seeing more content about it. Okay, so just know that savings plan. I think what you majorly need to take out from it is the fact that you are committing to spending a particular amount for a period of time, right? And you get discount based on that. If you ever spend above, it is now above. If you spend above, that is what is charged as an on-demand rate, right? But the thing you committed to spending, you get a lot of discount from that. Okay, so that's really the savings plan. And then there are two flavors there. The difference is just one has the flexibility. If you choose compute savings plan, it cuts across a family, a region, size, and everything. But if you go EC2 Instance Savings Plan, then you are stuck within a particular family and region. But your variability now lies around the size, the AZ, the OS, and the tenancy. Okay. And I mentioned that the usage beyond whatever you committed to is billed at the on-demand rate. Okay. What about reserved instance? So we've talked about on-demand, right? On-demand is really when you demand it, you get it. And then we also said savings plan. What about reserved instance? Reserve is also, check the word. Savings plan is like a plan to save, right? But reserve, you are reserving something, right? So usually you will be like, there's usually a tenancy, there's like a term, and most times it's always 1-3 years. So you see how people didn't get the first question that I was asking. But usually, the longer most times that you choose, the more the discount you get. But the whole idea is that if you have like a workload, right, that you are sure would always be running for the next 1 year, that's where reserve instance comes in. Because now it's just like that machine that I launched. If I know that for the next 1 year I need this machine to always be running, that's a good use case for me to say I want to reserve this machine for the next 1 year, right? So that I know that I'll get a lot of discounts because I've already reserved it for the whole year, right? And usually you specify like the instance type, the region, the tenancy, and the OS. Basically you specify the specific attribute and say, I want this machine for the next 1 year, and it's given to you. And then for your payment plan, in this case, you can choose you don't want to pay any amount, or you want to pay partial, or you want to pay all upfront, right? So either no upfront, partial upfront, or all upfront, right? And depending on which of these that you use, you get even higher percentage and big savings. So no will give you the least of the savings, partial will give you more, and then all, like if you imagine you are saying I'm taking it for a year and you are paying all up front, you get a lot of savings. And I think if you come from a business world, you know how these things are. They're just a way for you to more or less like have somebody. It's just like even when you subscribe, right? When you do subscription, sometimes they'll tell you if you subscribe for 3 months, it is cheaper. You maybe get like a 50%, 15% discount. They can say if you take for a year, you get 50% discount, right? That's just how it's like you're reserving the instance for like 1 year, and that is giving you huge discounts now, depending on whether it's like a partial upfront or no upfront or all upfront. Okay, and then there is really two flavors. So standard reserve instance and there's convertible. Standard just means you can't really change those things, right? But convertible, you can always go back there and and make modifications to what you have done. And standard will give you the most savings because it's like fixed. Convertible, you have to go in there and make those. You have to go there and make those adjustments, and that's why the savings you get there is a bit reduced. Okay, but just at this level, I think you need to know, especially the high level, the fact that you are reserving it for a long period of time, right, and getting that discount. I think at the cloud practitioner level, you might not be required to go like deep into the details, but you still need to understand these things as time goes on because you see them at different phase of your journey. Okay, and then you can basically reserve it at a regional level or like at an AZ level. Okay, so some of these things we can't demo them, and the reason is because it's like I have to go to the account and I'll be creating like reserve instance, like I'll be reserving or paying all these reservations when we don't need them. But it's easy once you understand the concept. There's like a place you can go. But one thing again that is unique about reserve instances is that you can't change your mind. The only way you can sell it is basically to go back and go to like a marketplace, the AWS marketplace, to sell it out, right? So it's not something that you say I'm no longer like you have to, if you want to relinquish it, you have to go and sell it in the marketplace. That one is something you need to take note of. Okay, that one is key. So what about spot instances? So we've talked about three models, right? We talked about on demand, we talked about savings plan, we've just talked about reserved instances. There's also spots, right? So when you see spot, that word is just what you need to take note of. Spot is really for if your instance, for example, is something that can be interrupted. Just think about a machine that could be started and stopped anytime, and nothing is going to happen to your application. So if you had like an application you're running and you don't really care, like it's a job that if you stop it and you resume it, it's going to continue, it's going to run as expected. That's a good use case for Spot. These things are always dependent on your usage. So you see, in some places you are using Spot, in some places you are using on demand. So it's not one or the other. it's always the EC2 is going to be tuned based on your usage. So spots, the use is basically if your workload can be interrupted, and that's just take note of the word spot in spot itself. If it can be stopped, right? So and it's still going to work as expected. So you can stop the machine, start it again, and it's still going to do its thing, right? And that's where spot instances work, and you get a lot of discounts. It's like you are getting spare capacity. Remember, I told you that in the AWS cloud, you're not the only one using this capacity. You're not the only one using some of the resources that are out there, right? So it means that at some point, some people are using, some people are not using, right? So this is like I'm saying, oh, if there's a free resource, I want to use it. But whenever you need it, you can take it back. That's a simple way to put it. So I need it. I want to use it. But if you want to take it. Just give me 2 minutes notice that you want to interrupt it. That's how Spot works. So in 2 minutes, you are going to be notified that it's going to be interrupted, and then after that time, the machine can be reclaimed from you. So in as much as your machine, your EC2 instance can survive restarting, or getting a new machine, why not? You can always use Spot instance, right? So like it's mentioned there, ideal for fault tolerance. So if you want, like I mentioned, if your application can survive, like just stopping it anytime, that's a fault tolerant application, right? It means that if you restart it, it doesn't really affect the application. So that's a good use case for Spot. It's also flexible, or something that runs a batch job. One takes a particular batch, runs through it. Even if it fails, it can go back again and restart, So and then when we get to the section where we are talking about auto scaling, you can see how Spot instances could be a fleet also, right? That you can use for your non-critical. The word is really non-critical workload. So if your workload is not critical, something that is not required to be like always on and running, that's a good use case for Spot instances. Okay. And then capacity reservation is also another option, right? But here, basically, there's no discount. This one is not for discount per se. It's like you are more or less like reserving a capacity, right? Yeah, there's no discount. It's just like you are saying, please hold these on-demand machines for me because I need them. It's just like how you go and pay for a hall or something. For if you have an event, how you go and reserve a particular hall. You are making the payment already. You are holding it. But again, if you think about it, if you don't do your event, maybe I know in a lot of cases people usually get refund, but in this case, no, it's not like that. It's like you are reserving that spot. So whether you're using it or you're not using it, you are still going to be billed because you are really reserving this spot. Okay, so hold on demand instances capacity in a choosing AZ, right, for any duration. So you can specify the duration for a particular AZ and say, give me this capacity and hold it for me, right? And no time commitment. Basically, you can cancel anytime. But the billing itself is billed at on-demand rate. So that's why I said you're not getting any savings. This is not, but there is also an option. Okay. But if you take this option, you reserve, like you hold it down, then you combine it with some of the other savings plan that we have seen, like reserved instances, reserved savings plan, right? Or the savings, we talked about savings plan and we talked about reserved instances. So if you combine this and that, you can also get a lot of benefit, right? Because here it's like, I want to reserve this, please don't let it go. And then you can also apply those other savings to get the actual discount that you're looking for. Okay. So especially the one example that I mentioned, large event, like I said, if you have like an event that you wanted to host and you wanted the hall, you can go pay, get the hall, make sure it's reserved. Like, I don't want to hear that, oh, someone has taken it, like someone has paid for it. No, you are reserving it. So, and then you can basically target a specific instance or target a pool, right? So basically just you are reserving the capacity. The other one, you get discount. This one is like you are telling AWS that please keep this for me. So whether you're running the instance or not, you're going to be paying until you cancel the mode, right? So what about dedicated instance? So dedicated instance is not now we're now going back to like how you more or less like run your EC2 machine. Remember the EC2 machine that we've been running? I started it on demand mode and it's running, right? But there are some people who say, I want like a dedicated hardware, right? I want a dedicated hardware to my account. Remember, everyone has an account. You have an account. So what you can actually do is that you can actually launch an EC2 instance and be like, I want a dedicated hardware. And that hardware is going to be dedicated to my account alone. So it's not going to be shared with another account. That's just the idea of dedicated instance. So it's a single tenant model. So there's no, like again, I mentioned, there's no payment, there's no cost benefit like the discounts that we saw that you get from this one. Instead, you are the one paying more money because you'll be paying more than the on-demand rate, right? Because it's like you are requesting a dedicated hardware to your own account. So you're going one step higher. You're like leaving the pool, right? You're saying, I want like a dedicated hardware that is connected to my that my account is using alone, right? And usually there are reasons why people do it. Maybe they want to meet, compliance requirements, or they want to bring like their existing software, right? Maybe like they have a server and there's a software attached to it. There's like a license attached to it, and they want to bring it over. That's like a good way, right? So more or less like compliance is really one of the, compliance is important. But when you say bring your own license, like it's not like a hard requirement. that's when people use dedicated instance. So after this slide, I'll show you the more or less like the second flavor of this, and you see how they differ. Okay, like I said, the pricing is still on demand, right? But more expensive than on demand, because now you're not just taking a pool, rather you're saying, please, this hardware has to be given to my account. It doesn't mean that only the EC2 machine is going to run on the hardware, but any other um, any other hardware that is going to use it is also, any other EC2 machine that is going to use it will be in your account. So it's in your account, not in anyone's account. You are taking the hardware to your, making it single tenant, right? But again, you can go one level higher and take a single host, like a single tenant host, right? So hardware, remember, like you can have like a host that has so many EC2 instance running on it. But right now, you are taking the entire host all by yourself, right? More or less like this host has to be dedicated to me, which means all the sockets, all the cores, the CPUs, you can actually control them, right? And this is when I think someone is asking what is B. That is when you bring your own license. This is really where it becomes a huge requirement, right? Especially if you want to meet compliance requirements, and it's around like you have to use like an existing license that you already have. So Windows license, if you had like a Windows machine that you were already running and you wanted to migrate to the cloud, yeah, that's when like you should use like a dedicated host. This is like the most expensive option, so it's very expensive because it's like you're taking a whole like a host all by yourself, right? And here you can really control everything, right? Because it's your host, so you can actually control placements. You know how the where everything goes within that host. You can actually decide it. Okay, so it's like the highest of the flavors, but it's also more expensive because you are taking full control of the machine. So yeah, like I said, dedicated instance and dedicated host, they are very similar. The only thing is that dedicated host, like I said, one is single tenant. Both of them are single tenant, but dedicated host that has that host visibility. So it's not just the hardware at that hardware level, but more or less like at the host itself, right? Um, and then we said for licensing, if you really were targeting to like bring your own license, that's where dedicated host shines, right? The billing is per instance hourly for both of them. One is per instance hourly, and then the other one is host, right? Because like I mentioned, the other one is like a hardware that is attached just to your account, right? But the entire host is in your is dedicated to you alone, right? So one, you can use it most times for compliance isolation, but the other one is really when there is like a license, and that is like that bring your license part, right? If you really need to confirm, you have to use like a dedicated host. So as time goes on, I think at the cloud practitioner level, maybe you need to know these things at the surface level, but you see these little details as time goes on your journey, you probably need to know them, because that some harder certifications will test you on some of these little, some of these little areas, especially things like bring your own license. So if you see an exam and you say, and there's like bring your own license, you should know that that's like a dedicated host. And if you see more or less like a dedicated hardware, right, you know that that's like a dedicated instance, right? So, but maybe at this level, you're not expected to go very deep. The questions will be at the surface for now, but it's also good you have an idea about it. Um, yeah, I'm just going to talk about this one on the surface. When we get to a different section where we talk about volumes themselves, talk about EBS. Again, we'll talk about image builder. But basically, remember that when we're setting up our EC2 instance, we had like an AMI that we used. In AWS, there's a concept of EC2 Image Builder. And what it means is that you can actually build those AMIs yourself. You can actually decide, exactly, you can use, the Bootstrap script, like the script we had, right? We have to create it, but with Image Builder, you can do more. You can basically just create like a pipeline around your AMIs, right? We talked about AMI being Amazon Machine Image, and an image that's required for a machine, right? It's required to run a machine, just like the OS, right? So you can even build a pipeline around it. So whenever you ever get to the exam hall and you are seeing you need to build like a pipeline or something that builds an image for you, that's really Image Builder. That's really how you need to know it at this level. But there's a lot that goes in. But at this level, cloud practitioner level, just know. And I keep telling you, image is Amazon machine image, right? Is AMI. So when they say image builder, meaning something that builds an AMI. So that's the concept you really need to know at this level, right? So you can even distribute, when you build the AMI somewhere, you can distribute it to other areas such that it can be used, right? So you can even do security scanning and testing. So at this level, nothing much is required from you. Just know that Amazon Image Builder is really something you can use to build the same AMIs that we use. Remember, when we're bringing up a machine, we use Linux too, right? But we can as well build our own custom image, right, from scratch. We can even layer on top of images that already exist and add custom functionality inside. Okay, so just so you know. So when you think about EC2, for example, there is a part that you should handle, and there's a part that AWS should handle also, right? So if you think about it, things like the data center, I think we've seen a lot of these, right? So So the guest OS, for example, I think that there was one time I asked this question and some people were kind of confused, right? If you think about the data center, like the hypervisor, the data center, we don't really see that. So AWS takes full responsibility, right? So it's not us. But when you think about the OS, so if you think about you install Linux or you install Windows or you install Mac, right? If you install a particular OS and the OS is 10, and they said that OS now has like a vulnerability and the fix is now in 10.2, you don't expect AWS to patch that for you, right? So it's your responsibility to go back and more or less like switch the OS from 10 to 10.2, right? So the application that you run inside of it. So if you remember, at some point we've done like Python, we've used Python. So imagine it was a Python application that was running inside of the EC2 machine. It's not, AWS will not ensure that that application code is secure. It's your job to do, right? So, but again, when you think about like IAM and security groups, like, so AWS will provide a service, but you just saw how we could use like a rule to decide what can be done in an EC2 machine. Because think about it, if somebody gains access to your EC2 machine, what would they be able to do? If you give them a permissive rule that says do star on all star, meaning be able to do star on all resources, the person can go there and, if they gain access to the database, the person can actually bring down your database or do anything, right? So you have to define the least privilege, right, to use in those cases. Also, network design. Right now, if you see, we were just using the default VPC, everything is public, like we're not really doing a lot. But as time goes on, you begin to see that you have to create your own environment. You have to create your own isolated environment that shuts the door, right? So it means that some of those machines, they're not things you can access anymore with public IPs. You have to more or less like have a pipe, you have to more or less like have like private connectivity to reach those machines, right? So although AWS will provide the VPC itself, right, the network is about all the subnets and all the security pieces that has to go in. The design of the network, you have to do all that, right? So definitely on the data side, the durability and in the storage, AWS would handle that. But what about the encryption and the backup? Think about it. Your AMI, for example, is like a storage light, right? So, and again, your root volume, for example, so your AMI, as part of using the OS, you'll be storing data. AWS is not going to back up all those data for you. You still have to create like backup plan to be sure that, okay, I'm using this, I'm storing things on this EBS volume. Am I ensuring that it's being backed up? Because you can't be using instant stuff, for example, that that once you start and stop it, it's just going to wipe the data, right? You can't be using that and expect AWS to handle it for you. You have to create like a persistent data, persistent volume to use and ensure that either you're taking snapshot or you're saving it. So there is the data layer. AWS is going to do their part, but things like encryption and the backing up of the data, it's your business to handle, right? And we're going to see that as time goes on also, like the data that is involved when you use like an AMI, where you save it, how you put it in the volume and how you can even encrypt it and how you can also copy it here and there, right? Or do like snapshotting. Okay, we'll see all that as time goes on. Yeah, that really brings us to the end of this class. I know for some part I showed you some things, and towards in some part, yeah, some things are meant to be theoretical. Honestly, at this level, so don't expect that is everything that you'll be doing. You'll be doing practicals, like we'll be writing code. No, not for all of them. But those for the very basic, the beginner construct, you need to have like those hands-on. But there are some things that will just be textual, right? So you need to know them at a high level. Okay. So summary, we talked about the different instance type, right? For EC2, we talked about, so by now you should know what family means. So when you say family, right, in an instance, you should know what it means. When you say size, you should know what it means, right? We said that M could have like, M2, 2 there, we could say it's like the generation of the like M class. And we said if size is when you say 2x large or 4x large, right? And then the state, the lifecycle state, I told you, and the running, the terminated state, the stop state, and all that. And then we also talked about some little networking. So when we're doing security group, right, we're already doing, that's like a networking component, right? Because security group is needed for you to be able to gain access to the application. So that's one layer of networking, right? And because it's a firewall, but you don't see it. If you were working in a traditional setup, you know that configuration that you're doing is turning, like behind, it is like putting some rules that decides who will gain access to the machine. So you don't see the physical device, but there is a physical device there that is tuning those firewall and setting it up for you. So it's on the networking layer, right? And then we talked about like IPv4 and some of the management that can come with it if you wanted to keep track of, where you're being charged if you're using IPv4, right? And then we talked about AMI being the image that you need to boot up an EC2 machine, right? And then we talked about user data script as a script to bootstrap the machine, right? So these are basic terminologies that is expected for you to know at this level, right? To some extent, you are required to know how to use some of them, but to some extent, you also just need to know them at like the high level in terms of like what they are. Because at your cloud practitioner exam, I'll mention it again, you will not be required to write any code or do anything or show a code that is correct. Most times it will be about what does what and questions around that, really your understanding of each services. But I also like it when people go the extra mile to do more, even at this stage, so that it just gets you prepared as you go deeper in your AWS journey. Okay, so And then we talked about like the single tenant option, right? They're all single tenancy, so dedicated instance versus dedicated host, right? And then cost optimizing tools. I don't think I don't think I specifically mentioned this, right? But I think I mentioned spot interruption notices, right? 2 minutes. But again, I also mentioned that spot instances are really good for interruptible workload. So if your workload is something that can be interrupted and you can recover from that, why not use spot instance and get a huge savings, right? Instead of running like an on-demand machine that's completely running, right? Um, I know we didn't really mention the T instances. The fact that it's also a way you can gain, you can make, you can more or less like there's something they call burst credit, in the sense that you can use it while you are using it, it's gaining credit from you for you are more or less like saving gas. It's like you're saving credit, right? And then at some point you can do above the capacity of the machine because of the credits you have acquired over time. Okay, and those are like the T2 instance. If you see the instance we're using, we're actually using a T2 micro. All right, that's the one we're using. But there's something that is unique about them, and that's the CPU credits that you can get. So when it's being used, it accumulates some credits that allows it to burst above its like its baseline performance. So do more because of the credit it has gathered over time. So there are instances that operate at that level too. So yeah, I know this is a lot of it's a lot of details, but sometimes again, I'm not entirely sure how far we want to go in terms of the class. But I try as much as to limit it between within 1 hour 30 minutes. That's what I try to limit it to. So we're at the end of this class for today, and I think yes, we've showed everything that you need to know. So.